Kris, it's great to be having this conversation together in person. Thanks for making the trip. But we've seen from a global perspective, lots of developments happening in our area, particularly in the network space. And I'm wondering what are some of the trends you're seeing and how they're actually impacting things like innovation, security, risk, governance. What's top of mind for you?
No, thanks, Derek. I would say there's certainly definitely a good visibility that we have in the network, right? Verizon sees about 72% of the world's internet traffic. So that really allows us to be very prescriptive in terms of the threats that we see, the adversarial patterns, anything from cybercrime to nation state type of attackers. And certainly here in Australia, I think, much like any other country, you see both of those, right? I think certainly some of the advances that are being driven by kind of the likes of, the cyber criminals using, ransomware, using business email compromise, but also the nation state using, kind of the supply chain attacks, really is something that we try to dive in a little bit deeper, especially when it comes to kind of the governance, right? I think all of the security within an organization is organized by how they structure that governance model, how they react to threats, how they protect and prevent and prepare for threats as an organization. So having those tools and that intelligence available really allows you to be, very unique and very precise in terms of how you're going to prepare. I would say, a lot of organizations are doing the right things, but there's certainly a lot of creativity with the cyber criminals and the cyber adversaries that organizations need to stay on top of, right? So it's really a living ecosystem that we want to make sure we're tapping into, and just, through our publications, through our data breach reports, and through some of the thought leadership that we provide, it's really our intent to arm the community with the necessary data points that they need to be able to make those right decisions in their governance model.
Kris, in an Australian context, following on from that, we have a large number of small to medium enterprises. Increasingly, as part of our supply chain, they are becoming part of the threat. How does that sort of resonate with what you're seeing globally?
I mean, that's certainly a reality, right? Because it's kind of the weakest link that exists in any type of ecosystem is what you would go after when you're an adversary. So one of the things that is very important for organizations of any size is to at least be security minded, right? We always talk about security awareness, which is a good thing to be aware of that there's a potential threat. Everybody hears about ransomware. Everybody hears about the nation state type of attacks, but a lot of organizations think it's not going to happen to them. But that's that shift in culture, kind of from a security aware to security minded culture is really key to a lot of organizations. And I know that in Australia specifically, the Australian government has done a lot in terms of informing the individual organizations as well as individual users of the threats that exist. The reality is an organization, whether you're small or big, you will be engaging likely with smaller organizations as well. And typically we see a lot of those organizations being compromised and then leveraging those as a pivot point into larger enterprises, right? So you're really managing your supply chain, understanding some of the risks that you have. And there's certainly some great tools and visibility out there that really allow you to do almost kind of the cyber risk monitoring of those particular business partners that you're dealing with to really understand what the threats are and how they're potentially impacting you as a business. And as I would say, any organization, of any size, you need to make sure that you have that you're doing your basics right, that you have your hygiene identified, that you have it implemented, but at the same time that you're also leveraging a good partner ecosystem with security professionals that know what they're doing and that can help you along that path. And maybe just one final comment on this, right? I think supply chain, it's really been published quite a bit as a threat vector recently, but it's been around for quite some time. And the best you can really do is to put a protective plan in place to run through tabletop exercises and make sure that you're ready for when the real threat hits you as an organization.
And just speaking of that tabletop or wargaming type thing, what are ways that you should be really looking for best practice in that space?
So I would say there's a number of control sets out there. Within the United States, we have kind of the NIST and the Center for Internet Security Guidance. Within Australia, you have your critical infrastructure controls now that are being, certainly, resonated through some of the government entities as well. So I think that there's a recognition that there's a need to do that and have strong foundations. And I think those a lot of those controls are in place in organizations, but generally they're not as widely pushed through the ecosystem. So one of the things you really need to do is make sure that you have a very strong security program that's encompassing of everything, including your partners, your remote users. Especially with COVID right now, a lot of folks are working from home. So your expanded enterprise now includes people's homes as well to some degree. So it's being acknowledged in the overall security ecosystem that's now part of the organizational security policy as well. So a lot of good standards out there, but I think what I would say is you need to choose the right one that fits for you, because what fits for you is not necessarily what fits for another person or another organization. So it's that balancing act of choosing what's right for you as an organization, not necessarily what's best in class, if you will.
And you talked about that regional investment here in Australia. We support, as you're aware, both enterprise and government, and we've invested. Verizon has invested in terms of SOC capability here to support not only Australia but also our APAC region. What are some of those differences that come from operating that type of SOC that we have here in Australia,
Sure.
and what is the benefits for a customer?
Yeah, absolutely. I would certainly say, the Canberra SOC, which supports the APAC region, has been around, for well over, 15 years or so. It's probably one of the more longer established SOCs that we have within the footprint. It's one of our core three regional SOCs. Really the significance of it, and the reason we also put it in Australia is because we have a strong commitment to both the local talent markets, as well as the relationships with the private and public sector in Australia. Australia is one of the key partners also for the Five Eyes partnership from an intelligence community perspective. So being able to kind of garner that type of information, that intelligence sharing, and have locally cleared individuals that understand the market, that understand the culture is really important, because the way that business is done in different parts of the world is varying, and we want to make sure that we're providing the best possible local support. Also, we know that if you're running in an operations center where you're handing off to different SOCs across the globe, as a customer, you're also potentially losing touch with some of the individuals. There's handover points. There's different types of individuals that you may be dealing with, both on the customer and the Verizon side. So we want to make sure that we provide the best possible experience for our customer, and that's really connecting with the clients, understanding their environment. So if day in, day out, you can provide the SOC analysts that are really a part of your team, that sit on your staff calls, that work in your region, I think it provides the best possible outcome for the clients. And in many ways, the clients here in Australia have the ability to connect locally with their SOC analysts. They're able to come out to the SOC, spend some time with them, and I think that's really important, because security, the ecosystem for security, it's important about having that tribal knowledge from within the organization and mixing that with the security expertise that we have in Verizon. And it's been a tremendous success. I think the Canberra SOC is probably one of the better use cases in that space, and we'll continue to invest in our talent in Australia, both in the managed and the professional services side, to continue growing that public and private partnership that Verizon has and enjoys with the clients here.
And talking about talent, we really are seeing some challenges in that space, particularly like cybersecurity generally, but particularly in terms of supporting SOC and the various functions that you need to go through, from detection to analysis and response mitigation, etc. What are some of the approaches Verizon is taking to that, both in Australia but also in a global context, for dealing with that, the war on talent?
Yeah, absolutely. The war on talent is probably one of the more common wars that we're all fighting this day. It's a challenge for everybody. I talk to CISOs on a weekly basis, and they're certainly sharing the same concerns that they have, right? So it's a little bit of both. I think both the scarcity of resources, as well as on the pent-up demand on those resources, is something that needs to be balanced and that we need to be able to address. So in terms of addressing kind of the challenge of the demand on those resources, we've started introducing things like automation, leveraging better scale through some of our centers of excellence as well, to really be able to leverage those highly demand skill sets for really the high value activities and the high value tasks, so that there's no kind of low value tasks that are done by some of the analysts that can be offloaded, or that can be done by automation. And we've actually seen some tremendous success in that. In the SOC, for example, when we're doing an incident investigation to determine the actual initial triage on the incident, that used to take about 11 minutes when it was done manually. Right now, it's about 6 seconds with automation. So we're definitely able to leverage resources a lot better in that way, for example. But then also from the global talent pool, right? I think, kind of the cross-pollination that exists between the teams, both on the professional and the managed services side, as well as Verizon Corporate, really allows us to establish the right talents pools, be able to have kind of cross training, but also cross career path movement within the organization. And we've seen some tremendous successes because you're taking somebody that has a slightly different vision and bringing them into a new part of the business. And at the same time, we've been investing a lot in terms of the training of new talents, looking at education programs, partnering with universities to really set us up for the talent of the future, because we all know that the workforce is only going to keep expanding because the threats keep expanding, and business needs to run at rapid pace. So at the same time, we've launched a lot of partnerships with universities and with various talent markets and education programs to make sure that we're bringing in the right talents and that we're training the talent for the future to help solve the problems of tomorrow.
In the last 12 months, a major sort of announcement has come out around the creation of AUKUS, strengthening of the alliance between the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia. Initially focused around nuclear submarines, but also recognised as when it was set up as being much broader in terms of its objectives and aims, in particular calling out cybersecurity and sharing information.
Mm-hmm.
We talked earlier about mentioned Five Eyes, which includes obviously extends that relationship into New Zealand and to Canada, and there is a very heightened degree of trust between those nation states in terms of the way we've engaged now for over 60 or 70 years since the end of World War II. But if you look at something like AUKUS and particularly that relationship between those three nations, from your perspective, coming from that cybersecurity perspective, where do you see it potentially leading and what it might mean as we look out into the sort of medium-term horizon?
Sure. And I think it's important, right? I think this alliance, I think, is an important element to call out. I think there's a few of these alliances around the globe, but certainly intelligence is something that really drives us to be able to pinpoint the threats, before they happen or as they're happening, so that we can react a lot better. In the past, as organizations were collecting intelligence, they were collecting the same intelligence, and they're friendly nations. So as they started sharing their intelligence, they started puzzling together and finding out that a certain amount of that intelligence was actually overlap. So we're not using the most effective approach across the allied nations ecosystems of intelligence apparatus. So what we want to make sure that we're doing as a private organization as well is making sure that we're tapping into the right intelligence that we have. And as a matter of fact, I think there's protocols that are being put in place now that are championed by the U.S. government, such as the SABRE initiative, right, to be able to define the right protocols for organizations, military organizations from various nations to be able to collaborate. Because before there was no way for the data to be transferred in a secure manner, and right now there was actually a meeting last week in the United States between Australian, UK, and US defense officials, where they started trialing some of this within the kind of the J6 kind of cyber and communications command around how to start interacting and sharing intelligence, right? Because we know at the basis, seeing about 72% of the world's internet traffic, that intelligence is just so important. As we go in and do our investigations, as we help our clients implement security programs, the type of intelligence that we can bring them is really second to none. So we know that the only way that we can stay ahead in this game of cyber warfare is if we share intelligence with our partners, and that includes both the private as well as the public sector, and that's a bidirectional street, right? So that we're making sure that we're getting that intelligence, we're sharing the intelligence that we can, and that we're certainly disseminating that across our partner ecosystem, but also to protect Verizon's networks. Verizon is a critical infrastructure player. It has been for many years, so we're also a target for a lot of cyber adversarial activity. So it's so important that we drive those initiatives, and that we're also championing that same type of interaction that we have. I think we're going to see that evolve over the coming years. Certainly with the advent of better integration, right classification and integration of the systems, and interpretation of each other's classification levels when it comes to threat intelligence, and then be able to apply that across the global ecosystem, right? Because we're all facing the same threats in many ways. We're facing the same actors, just different campaigns. So we want to make sure that we're staying ahead of the game. And the best way of doing that is by communicating one another, and making sure that we keep the mission central, and that we're executing to that mission as a consistent partnership.
From an APAC perspective, and indeed across the globe, since COVID, there's been a bit more of a focus and questioning about the supply chain, and also about then potentially delivering or developing more sovereign capability. And we've seen that play out here politically in Australia, with a number of both private sector and policy pieces starting to push around developing that government should be choosing more sovereign or developing its own internal or local capability. Verizon, we play globally. We're a US-based business, but we operate globally. From a point of view of the perspective of and we invest locally, and we fund resources, local jobs. We have hired cleared staff in our SOC, etc., that you talked about. But what do you see that trend, and what does it mean for global businesses like Verizon, and the way we provide and look to go to market with our security services in response to that concern about saying, hey, I need to develop that local capability more?
Well, it's been an argument for many years. In many ways, same thing in the United States, right? I think we're seeing that as well. I would say, what sets us apart and what makes us unique. I think first of all, we have the global interconnectedness of the network, across, kind of the internet backbone. At the same time, I think we have an advent into certain technologies such as the 5G, the MEC, the fixed wireless access, etc., that are all driving unique new access vectors, which are also becoming attack vectors for organizations, right? So being a pioneer in this space really allows us to also be a global thought leader in this space, and I think that's part of our mantra as well, when we kind of look at how we share back with the community and be able to inform the community, because in many ways, Verizon has pioneered many technologies, largest 5G deployment in the United States, and certainly one of the first to start, rolling out some of the new initiatives with regards to worker from home and some of the capabilities there. So I think we have a lot of lessons learned that we can share with folks that maybe within a specific region you may not necessarily have. We also have a vast ecosystem of professionals that we can tap into. When you're dealing with a Verizon consultant or analyst, you're not dealing with a single person. There's an army of thousands upon thousands of folks behind them. And we're also critical infrastructure ourselves. So we're having to deal with a lot of partner ecosystems ourselves. And a lot of the problems that our clients are facing today, we've had to solve internally. We've had pitfalls and we've had successes, and being able to share those both with the clients and share what works and what doesn't work and why really allows them to have that, have a strong, opinion in terms of how to do the things right, and how to build right from the first time, as opposed to kind of going through that process kind of with trial and error. So really our global capacity, our global capability, and then leaning in with local talent, I think provides a great mix and a great unique differentiator for our clients as well.
And you mentioned, that you start off with the backbone, but you talk about new technology, and certainly we're seeing, increasingly, the next range in terms of private 5G, and then locally potentially private 5G leading to automation or other ways of innovating in terms the workspace. But what do you see that come in from a security lens in terms of that innovation and technology? Where do you see it potentially going in terms of changing what we view as the threat?
Sure. And every time we introduce new technology, it introduces a new threat vector, right? And whether it's a 4G network or a 5G network, I think we've seen threat vectors materialize, whether they're academic or whether they're actually applied. But we certainly look through them. We do a lot of red teaming kind of internally to make sure that we're understanding the threats there. But certainly with the advent and the capacity and the volume that we expect to see in kind of the 5G industrialization, really, with the MEC, with some of the sort of the mobile edge, all the way with the kind of the private 5G deployments, right? There's certainly a lot of concern certainly as we're starting to deploy that in the critical infrastructure, right? Whether it's utilities, whether it's infrastructure or transportation, or even government. So I think you're going to start seeing a lot of accreditation in that space, requirements for specific security controls. And Verizon, for example, was one of the leaders in driving forward kind of the 3GPP protocol, which kind of is a security layer protocol that underpins 5G. So not only are we an innovative technology, we're also an innovator when it comes to securing that technology and putting the thought into what potential attack vectors are. And the teams that we sit in, as well as some of the other teams within Verizon, they go on about devising some of the attack vectors and being able to predict and close those before the attackers can exploit them, right? So I think it's always a little bit of a cat and mouse game, but I think if you share the intel that you have, if you share the vision and you start developing control sets and providing input to control sets, I think you're very much in a good place, and I think Verizon is certainly a leader in that.
And finally, Kris, if I was a CISO of a medium or small and large enterprise at the moment here in Australia or in APAC, what would be the top 2 or 3 things you'd suggest to me that I should be thinking about today?
Okay, yeah, it's what I would say is, I think first of all, understand what your assets are and make sure those assets are well protected. I think, especially in today's ecosystem with people working from home, with remote connectivity, with cloud connectivity, it's sometimes very difficult to define and put your finger on what those assets are, right? So really understanding those so that you can understand your attack surface and your attack footprint, that's really key. Number two, choose the right partner who you're working with, because we all know as organizations, we don't have many of our customers are not technology companies, right? Their business is either to run airlines or to run banks or whatnot. So their core industry isn't security. So the best approach is to have a hybrid approach and choose the right partner as they're going through that. And third, I would say understand that the job market is scarce, and make sure that you're aligning and investing in the right talent and choosing the right vendors and the right partners for some of the other technologies or the implementations that you're looking for. So really, those 3 things are things to really drive home, and then kind of encompassing that, a very strong and mature security program that all the way starts with governance and has the board visibility as well, and the board edicts to be able to execute while balancing with the actual risk, because nobody has endless budgets. So we want to make sure that we're choosing the right controls as an organization. So.
And that's an interesting thing just that you raised there at the end in terms of the board and the increasing board visibility and indeed involvement in terms of and consideration of cybersecurity. What do you see that as changing the discussion that the CISO is then potentially having with and what they need to then consider?
And I would say certainly boards are becoming a lot more aware of cyber, just not only because they're reading it in the news and they're seeing it on the television, but they're also being driven to it by regulations and statutes that are now being developed and being executed by the authorities. So I think the conversation needs to be about risk, right? Boards understand risk because they've been dealing with financial risks for years. So it's kind of the risk argument, right? Understanding, what are your risks to an organization, make sure that they're captured in a way that the boards understand it, whether that's a financial risk, a reputational risk. Examples are always good, and choosing the right metrics to measure success, right? Whether that's things like being able to detect quicker, being able to demonstrate rationalization of security components and driving ROI as a result of that, or whether that's just staying out of the news and not becoming one of the taglines in terms of the breaches, right? But that board conversation is very important because ultimately the board is in many ways held responsible for many things and many decisions that get executed in an organization. So they need to be aware of the threats, but also it needs to be a balanced conversation around expenditure, and it kind of needs to be the hype needs to be taken out of it, and fact needs to be pushed into that conversation.